Hallå och välkommen to our 7th video tutorial brought to you by Norhe. Now, today we're going to be looking at 3D bridge design. Now, I say design, but really I'm going to be focusing in this lesson a little bit more on just the mechanics of drafting in 3D. So, the first thing that you'll probably want to do is set up your viewports. I have 4 viewports here. Now, you can use any kind of viewports you want. You can even just use one. But I find it useful to have 4 viewports and having each one be kind of a different perspective. So, for example, I'm looking down on the top of the bridge in the plan view here, and the elevation view from the side here, and in the section view from the front of the bridge here. Now, I'll go over to the View tab. You can actually configure your viewports here. So I have 4 equal set up at the moment. You can do it however you want. But once you click into a viewport, you can change what perspective you're looking through. So this one happens to be, I think this is technically front. Yeah, this is front. This should be top, at least. This should be right. And this, I just kind of have free floating. And I can rotate my viewpoint in this particular frame just by holding down the Shift key and then holding down my middle mouse. So, very useful little trick. So, you'll probably notice that I've already borrowed a lot of different concepts from previous lessons. So, in particular, from the 3rd video lesson, if you recall, we set up those dimension limitations. And so those are those purple lines that you kind of see in these different viewports. And I've actually rotated them such that you can see kind of in the 3D view that I have my plan view oriented above my bridge, I have my section view off to the side, and I have my elevation view off in front. So this kind of helps just so that once you set up your viewports like this, you can look through the bridge at these different perspectives and be able to use those dimension limitations just to see that you're within those limits. And you can see I'm just barely within the limits on this section view. And likewise with the clearance requirement. So once you have hopefully that set up, you can go through, rotate in all of your dimension limitations to each of the different views, and then you can start drafting. So the first place that I started for this particular design was I went back to one of our previous lessons when we started looking at 2D elevation sketching, and I took that first example that I did, which was just kind of an emulation of what our design looked like, I guess, last year. So here's the basic outline of the bridge, and I just started with, again, that 2D sketch, purely 2D, and then I kind of decided, okay, well, now let's just focus on one side of the bridge. So the first thing I did after I had my 2D sketch was I drew in the girders on one side of the bridge. So you can think of it like this. I'm going to go ahead, and now that you already see that I have my limits, I'm just going to get rid of a lot of these layers just to be able to illustrate this a little better. So I started with one side of the bridge, which I think I'll just kind of delete these for the moment now. So one side of the bridge, and then I drew in these girders. So you can just kind of take one of your outside chords there and then copy it over to here, and likewise you can copy this one down to create these ones as well. Now, doing the webbings was a little bit more tricky. As you can see, it's quite a bit of a challenge to sometimes get these in, but I'll kind of give a brief example of how you might draw those. So I'll delete those for the moment, and I'll switch to my webbing layer because I'm drawing in my webbings. So here's one way that I like to draw webbings. So I'll actually draw it on the more challenging side, in my opinion, which happens to be pretty much if you're drawing, say, a diagonal. And that can be very tricky. So I'm just going to draw a full diagonal across there to there, and then I'll draw from the midpoint there to that end there, and then I'll draw from the midpoint here to that end there. And then I can just get rid of those lines. I already have something like this over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that and use this as a base point to reference across, grab that, move it over, and then I can just slide this on up and bam. So check that out. Actually, I want to go over one more, so I'm going to midpoint there, and then basically do the same thing. Just kind of grab this temporarily and slide that on down there. Now, I already have these kind of intermediate webbings placed there, so I could have just connected down there, but if you didn't have that place to start, then you can do this kind of trick where you're using midpoints and then just sliding your webbings down to join up with the girder. And that's very useful if you're trying to just very quickly flesh out some kind of simple webbing configuration. So now I'm going to select this particular joint, and I'm going to go into this reference frame, mirror it over, and bam. And then I can just kind of copy that over a couple times, and whammo. There you have it. Very simple way to construct webbings in 3D. So hopefully not as headache-inducing as you hoped it, or had feared rather, that it might be. So that said, you can, and if you already have it drawn on one side, and I'll just kind of draw for example, I'll kind of grab some of these webbings that I've already constructed on this side of the bridge, and I particularly like to just select things in 3D and then do my operations in 2D in one of my reference frames, and I can just mirror those over to the other side of the bridge, and there they are. Alright, so I have them. I can just finish that off. So now, how do I tackle doing, say, my laterals? Well, in a similar fashion, you can just kind of go to your laterals layer, and I'm just going to construct one of this very simple laterals here, starting from maybe right there, and then I'll say it's 2 foot, maybe 11 inches. Sounds like a good number. You can kind of copy that down, and you can do the same kind of webbing thing in here. And by the same process, you can kind of flesh out the other webbings, or I guess rather your other laterals throughout the rest of the bridge. So once you have all your laterals in, blah 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 blah, you can mirror the other side of the bridge to the other side like that. So there you have it. Pretty simple method to just kind of very quickly extend your 2D sketches into 3D sketches very quickly. However, there are a couple of issues that I would like to point out if you're dealing with something in, say, a 3-dimensional sketch, and that would be if you're looking through a 2-dimensional viewport. Let's say I wanted to copy this over to some other location, and I'll kind of go in 2D and I'll say I want to go here. Now there's a 50-50 chance that this might give a poor result, and in fact, let me take a look. Oh, oops. So this is the one we just copied, but check it out. So technically, I wanted this line to connect to this line, but for some reason, it didn't do that. Now, why is that? Well, there's an ambiguity between which point AutoCAD wants to copy it to. So I guess, let's see, it could have copied the base point of this point to this point, or likewise it could have copied the base point of this point to this point or this point, and it really gets confusing. You just don't want to deal with that. So my best advice is, if you're moving things around, selecting base points, copying things, stuff like that, try to do that all in 3D, because oftentimes if you start trying to do things, even drawing, I think I prefer to draw actually in the 3D viewport, just because there's no ambiguity with which lines are being connected between which points. It just gets kind of, yeah, it gets a little ambiguous if you start trying to do it in 2D. So use your 2D, I think, to do certain operations like mirroring or rotating, even selecting certain objects, but I prefer to do most of my operations in 3D. Now, it's useful, of course, to have your 2D viewports, just so you can also check your dimensions. And on that topic, I'll take a look at the extension of the concept of our box. So I've already created a 3-dimensional box here, and the concept of the 3D box is no different from the 2D box, except I've just kind of drawn it out in 3D. So of course it's 3 feet by 6 inches by 4 inches, and just to give an example, I've enveloped it around this particular girder part, And as you can see, it fits quite snugly in that little box. And likewise, having the box in 3D and then just moving it wherever you like, it'll show up on your drawing in each viewport. So very handy. It should be this one. Yeah. I have some extraneous ones here, just left over from the sketch. And then of course here. So that all looks good. And you can use some of the same concepts as you did to draw in 2D, just to, draw in 3D. And I kind of wish that we'd been able to talk a little bit more about the concepts of designing, but right now I think it's important that you just get the basics of being able to use the 3D tools and the 3D drafting capabilities of AutoCAD to flesh out the design, because I don't think that's necessarily something that's covered in great detail. Drawing in 3D, I suppose. Drawing in 2D, sure, but be at ease though, because drawing in 3D is really not all that much more difficult than drawing in 2D. So hopefully, if that helps, well, go ahead and start playing around with drawing in 3D. Maybe, like I said, try to draw in or rotate in those limitations so that you have something that looks maybe something like this, if you think it would be useful. Maybe get a box or two, and then take one of your sketches and go ahead and try to flesh it out into a 3D sketch. Alright, well, hopefully I'll see you guys soon, and have a great week. Alright, good night.